Effiong, good morning.
Lagos.
Good morning.
Statements
introduced what's that, security trust fund, and that kind of changed the fortune of Lagos State in regards to security. And he also in the article, and then if you even really look at it, like you dive into it, like if the states are policing themselves, they're closer, in understanding the pain points of what's causing this insecurity. There's like a greater chance of accountability. You can there's higher effect of like shaming the person that's doing it, that's behaving badly.
yes.
So the effect would work better, right? And then I also agree with him strongly. I always think about it like states, like it's almost like if you have a business and
Yes.
you're getting funding every month for your business, why can't you be super efficient in creating wealth?
Yes.
I just kind of can't understand it.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate a little
Okay.
bit. Usually when this conversation of restructuring comes in, people keep saying that, well, the states are still restricted a lot, all this reporting to the center, and they're saying that, no, they really must just divide. Let's physically restructure. Let people control their own areas. There have been suggestions of not just states, but maybe we should go back to our old divisions of, the western region, the eastern region. I mean, what would you say to that, especially vis-a-vis the vice president saying, we mustn't mix up issues of good governance and diversification of the economy with arguments on corruption, and also where he mentions high administrative costs as well.
Yeah, I think there's a thin line between understanding that if you're controlling your resource, doesn't mean that the only people that can participate are from there.
Okay.
There still should be diversity. People can come from any part of the country and participate if you have the skill set or can build the capacity, right? But every region has something to offer and can be harnessed. Like he also pointed in the article with Lagos State, how Lagos State was able to generate internal revenue, which it's now what Lagos State generates is more than 30 states. It doesn't state that 30 states, but more than what 30 states would generate.
Okay.
So it's like it's proven that it's worked in some capacity, but it's but Lagos State kind of accidentally fell into it,
Okay.
as opposed to people like intentionally trying to do this.
Thank you very much for that, Fred. Gbolahan, that actually links very nicely to the next story, okay? Because our former presidents, from presidency, current and past now, the Vanguard newspaper, Obasanjo accuses the state governments of weakening local governments and stealing funds. And I say that it links to the previous story because if we're talking about good governance, which is then looks at, amongst other things, at issues of transparency, of prudence, of public finance, we are looking at local government areas who, according to our former president, are deliberately being stifled. We're looking at a situation where within the states, they are not transparent with their books. Lagos State is most culpable when it comes to that. We do not know how much Lagos actually spends on anything. And if we're generating revenue that surpasses 30 states combined, and we can't find a single road without a pothole on it, that's a bit frightening. What are your thoughts on this story?
Well, you know what the common saying is amongst the politicians, politics is local. And when you're talking about politics being local, you definitely now need to look at bringing governance down to the local people. And of course, this debate and issue has been going on now for so long. I mean, the former president Olusegun Obasanjo raised this issue once because he was the one that actually signed the bill into law then in 1976, which is about 42 years ago. We're talking about now where the local government should be autonomous from the state government. So of course it's aggrieved that many years down the line we're still having this issue going on where there's actually I should correct myself. It's not actually signing it that they should be autonomous, but he created the local government.
Yes.
And the whole idea behind creating the local government was for autonomy. And when we look at the autonomy as well, there's been a National Assembly bill that has been put in for the autonomy of the local government.
Yes.
Now, only 9 states out of the 36 have signed it, and you only need about 24 states to sign it into law. So far, we've only had Ogun State, we've had Cross River State, we've had Bayelsa, Kwara, Niger, and Plateau states that have signed it, and Benue as well. We still have so many other states that are yet to sign it, and you begin to ask yourself, are these people really not for true democracy, because when we're looking at democracy, we're talking of getting power down to the people.
Yes.
We're talking about decentralizing power. And, it stems from the conversation that you're having now about giving autonomy to the state. If you're giving autonomy to the local government as too.
Okay, so Gbolahan, a couple of questions, I guess, or comments as we then go through that is, what does this then say about the governance really of our states and the way governors operate, and looking at this idea of restructuring? If we have this already, where they've refused to devolve power all the way to the grassroots level to allow local governments and local council development areas, which Lagos State has, to actually work effectively. If they refuse to do that, what potentially might they do if they're now given full fiscal, autonomy? We're saying, okay, yes, let's be true federations, but they're already running the states as personal fiefdoms.
Well, you can only draw inferences from what you currently see now, that if they're not giving autonomy and they're not giving powers to the local government, then you can imagine or expect that, of course, when they have full powers as well, then they would appropriate powers onto themselves and absolutely just decimate the local government without having any authorities.
So then what about the NLC? Because our former president, just before we move on, Olusegun Obasanjo, does say that, listen, the NLC, the Labour Congress, the Nigerian Union of Local Government Employees, this is their area. This is what they should be fighting for. And we constantly see them striking. We constantly see them striking for higher salaries, but we don't see them making strong moves for any actual governance issues.
I think this also ties into our judiciary process as well, too, because quite a lot of times we've seen the National Union of Local Government Employees go on strike, complain, protest or so. And in an ideal situation, what you would expect to see is that you would see a lot of these unions taking the matters into the law court to settle. But unfortunately, there's no other way of getting a solution to it other than just shouting at the top of their voices.
I cannot recall having the NLC do anything of that sort when it comes to governance.
Not the NLC, but definitely the NULGE have. And I think they actually did go on strike this year as well to complain about wages and salaries and so many other things. A lot of things fall under the Local Government Act.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that. Well, I'll have a very interesting conversation. Ikemesit, up next, we're moving on to a more sobering conversation from the New Telegraph. 1,801 people have been killed, more than 50,000 displaced in the Plateau attacks. We see again communities that are regularly in the pages of our newspapers: Jos North, Jos South, Bassa, Riom, Barkinladi, Boko's local government, all being affected by the crisis. And the chairman of the Northern States Christian Association of Nigeria, Reverend Dr. Yakubu Pam, said that they have tried to visit all the IDP camps, but even up until now, for security reasons, Barkinladi, the Dorowa area, they couldn't go there. But they're still talking about moving people back to their ancestral homes. Is it really safe? Look at these statistics.
Yeah, so this committee worked over a 2-month period. They received 55 memoranda. They visited 27 camps. It's a little sobering that there are 27 IDP camps in Plateau State, and that doesn't really rise up to the media radar, as it were. We're more focused on the far northeast, and without realizing that the situation in Plateau is just as tenuous and concerning. The committee identified 87 villages and farmlands that it says were destroyed, and in most cases are currently under and this is the actual word that was used in the New Telegraph report. A little concerning, but this was the actual word: annexation by headsmen. There's a weird feel to it.
Problematic.
Yeah, there's a weird feel to that word. But essentially, what the committee is saying is that a lot of the people who are residents in these camps don't want to be there. They want to return back to their homes. The only thing that they need is an absolute guarantee that the security of their lives, their properties, and that of their families and their farmlands is guaranteed. The governor reaffirmed his administration's commitment to providing that, but there is nothing really in the reporting that talks about concrete steps on the part of the government. I mean, concrete steps that the government is committing to take or is already implementing on the ground to ensure that this happens. As far as we're concerned, this is still just a reporting paper, a photo op, and essentially a news report at the moment. The situation in Plateau State is more systemic than most people actually are willing to consider. It's it's been a situation that predates what's going on in the Northeast. It seems like we've been dealing with this in one shape or the other since the 1940s, essentially, and a concrete and a systematic political solution has to be found to this situation. If not, these fissures will keep rising up and bubbling to the surface from time to time.
Thank you very much for that, Ikemesit. Unfortunate, but very true. Up next, finally, Teleology takes up a 9 Mobile, appoints a new board. ThisDay newspaper is reporting this, and it's really more of a business comment, but there's been a lot of back and forth as to who was the preferred bidder. Teleology was the preferred bidder. Smile Telecoms was a reserve bidder, but officially the letter of no objection apparently has gone through from the NCC, even though the newspaper attempted to contact them to confirm that they haven't. But an announcement was made by Teleology and their new board of directors. The chairman is Mr. Nasiru Ado Bayero. Even gave a comment about it. A new era for 9 Mobile. What are your thoughts, Fred?
It's a straightforward article. It took 10 months, but it's done now. The promise, it's a new era. You always want to believe when it's new that it's going to be what is promised. The standards are going to be improved. You also have to keep in mind they're doing business in Nigeria, which is a little bit difficult. They're dealing with a lot of leakages that have already been established. You're coming to plug those holes, and you're trying to be, create value for your stakeholders, your investors. I just wish them well. It's good to have multiple players. It's better for the customer because when there's more competition, you get more for your buck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. We have a message in on our YouTube stream from Obasanjo Oshin. Interesting name. He says it's the normal cliche government does. He's reacting to the report from Obasanjo, former president. Now, let's move on to this next story from Daily Times newspaper. 40 million Nigerians suffering from mental disorders. Federal government raises alarm. Statistics that have put it that in Nigeria, an estimated 20% to 30% of our population are believed to suffer from mental disorders. So the federal government on Monday, Fred, they disclosed that an estimated 40 million Nigerians are believed to be suffering from mental disorders. The Permanent Secretary for Federal Ministry of Health, Abdulaziz Mashi Abdullahi, stated this at a conference, really, at a workshop. It's common knowledge that most people go undiagnosed for a long time, and we're seeing this report. I mean, it's something to raise awareness on. Don't you think?
Yeah, it is actually. I think like this can be obvious just looking at our traffic situation. You just get in the road. It kind of speaks to
in
you.
Lagos.
In
Anywhere.
Lagos, anywhere, it just speaks to you. But Lagos is like amplified. Like, you take a simple thing like we're trying to go through toll, and then there's like multiple lanes that are created, and then we're all stressed at the end. Then you're not acting like you're not mentally stable too, because But to get more serious about this, actually, I taken in university, I taken this class on abnormal psychology, and they stated that like stress and like difficult environment, poverty, kind of leads to more cases like this, like things like schizophrenics and like schizophrenia and things like that.
Yes.
So and then if you think about it, the heat too. We're not thinking about the environment. So this is really something we should pay attention to. It's not something we can just sweep under the table. The article kind of stated another thing, that this is actually more prevalent to destabilize the economy, as opposed to when we think about illnesses like AIDS or heart attack or wars. And if you think about it, if one person puts his car crazy on the road, it kind of stops the whole highway. It kind of stops productivity.
And that's just one situation. There are other factors or areas of life that really affect. You're talking about in marriages, for instance. A lot of people don't diagnose.
I just wanted to add very briefly, it's very alarming when we look at this figure. It literally means 1 in 5 people when we're talking about 40 million out of a population of 200 million. So it's quite alarming. Yes. But when we also look at it as well, too, is the quality of life that we're living in this country, and the work-life balance as well, too, that you get. These are all factors that add to such issues as mental disorders.
Thank you. And needless to say, the misconceptions really that follow it. Next story from ThisDay newspaper. I'll come to you, Ikemesit, for this one. Alleged 5 million naira bribery. We're talking about this again. The court restrains Kano Assembly from investigating the governor.
Yes, it should actually be dollars there.
Yeah, I was like, these are the kind of
million.
the
The
kind of
headline
things
is
that give me,
misleading,
you know,
yeah.
some of these
This
mental
day newspaper,
aneurysms.
please sort it out.
Man, $5 million.
Okay. So for time reasons.
Ikemesit.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, just a matter of court procedure. The original suit was filed by the National Coordinator of Lawyers for Sustainable Democracy in Nigeria, Mr. Mohammed Zubair. When the matter came up for hearing, the judge, who's the presiding judge, granted an order of interlocutory judgment, essentially restraining everyone, including all the members of the National Assembly, from doing anything, conducting any investigations, issuing any further press releases. Interestingly, releasing or playing any further videotapes. I didn't understand the playing videotapes part, but the releasing is pretty much self-explanatory. So, just a matter of court procedure. Now, typically, when you look at the separation of doctrines principle, if we can just hark back a little bit to social studies and political science, that a matter is in the court does not necessarily prevent Parliament, in our case, the National Assembly, for conducting its own investigations. There's such a thing as parliamentary, privilege, the Parliament's right to investigate and all of that. That's separate from, court procedures and matters that happen in the judiciary. But in this case, it's a State House of Assembly, and the matter has been filed as a matter of a constitutional nature. So that's an exception. That's why this is happening. So,
why do you think he's getting all this? Does it seem like preferential treatment to you, or does it seem like still abiding by the rule of law? I mean, because it's a sitting governor.
Because it's a sitting governor. Well, typically when matters come, if you and I, for example, in our capacities as Ikemesit and Valentine respectively, have a dispute, chances are it's not going to be of a constitutional nature, right?
Yeah.
But if there's a situation involving a state governor and a state legislature, then obviously there are certain situations where that might arise. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, let's move on. Well, I'll come to you for this next one from Punch newspaper. December 2019 deadline to weed out unqualified teachers stands. And who says this? Minister of Education, Malam Adamu. On Monday, he ruled out, made this statement and said he ruled out the possibility of extending the December 31 deadline, the December 31, 2019 deadline for disengaging all unqualified teachers from the nation's education system. So they're forming a glut. They're preventing those who really are more qualified than they are and just, without jobs from getting into the system. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's something going on about 31st of December anyway, deadline.
Not this year, though. Next year.
Well, 2019, 2018 is something particular about 31st of December. But going into the story as well, when we look at it, of course, it's very strange when you hear that he's actually standing by his word that they're going to uphold that weeding out of the unqualified teachers or so. Because why do you have to repeat this back and forth?
So everybody will hear.
Well, this usually happens in places like Nigeria where you set policies and then you find out later there's an extension of policies, the deadlines. Usually, you always find out that there usually is a grace period that will be given onto that as well too.
Yes, maybe, but for policies like this that affects education, I do not necessarily think so.
Let's wait until then we'll find out whether there's going to be an extension. But that being set aside as well, so why we should also look at the criteria and the structure that we put in place that actually allows for such teachers to have gotten into the system in the first place, because this shouldn't actually even be a matter for discussion. We know what our education system is like. It's very poor, and by now we shouldn't actually be talking about unqualified teachers. We should have been weeding out these teachers long ago, and there shouldn't actually be a deadline given to them as soon as you find out, because we're talking about the lives of the future of Nigeria here. It's very important.
Very, very important, Gbolahan. Thank you very much. Ikemesit, I'll come to you next for this one from Vanguard newspaper. We're talking about food crisis. Now, they said food crisis is imminent in Nigeria without innovation, and this came as part of a report really from scientists who warn the food crisis will be imminent if the country fails to deploy innovation and technology into the food industry to boost productivity and sufficiency. Plenty words.
Yeah.
The meaning.
yeah, and many implications, right? So the experts essentially raised the alarm, listing, our rising population, the huge technology gaps, the relatively uncomfortable enabling environment for researchers, inadequate funding for said research, high processing losses, and lack of a sustainable policy. The point is, this isn't a conversation we're having. How back to the issue we talked about with mental health, the issue with state policing, right, and more devolved power for the states. These are the sort of conversations we should be having. I think that's something that we need to understand as Nigerians. We're a big country. We're the largest black nation in the world. So any situation or any challenge we have will be supersized by the sheer size of us, right? So if there is an issue in the health sector, it's going to affect millions of Nigerians. If there's an issue in food security, it's going to affect millions of Nigerians. If there's an issue with respect to our politics, it's going to affect tens, if not hundreds of millions of Nigerians. So we need to be particular about the issues that, that we're having, and begin to have these conversations. When you look at the fact that almost 70% of our agricultural practices are still rooted in the 18th and in the 19th century. You look at the fact that our physical infrastructure deficit in terms of the quality of our roads, the quality of the rail lines, the inadequate storage facilities for foods. In the 21st century, Nigeria and much of the African continent is still one of the last places in the world where food is essential. We've not broken out of the seasonal food gap, which is something that's which is something that has prevailed in terms of the length of our existence here on earth as human beings until roughly about the 19th century. We're still dealing with that kind of situation. I want to have a conversation about that. We're celebrating, instead, what we have from the Ministry of Agriculture is we're celebrating totem achievements like we do not import rice as much anymore from Thailand.
That we're not having the conversation not entirely true. Don't forget that we have been having a GMO conversation for a long time, and part of that is to help address some of our food issues. And I just wondered what you think about it in terms of GMO foods, because people are saying a big issue as well that we have is because of our lack of certain infrastructure, even moving our food from place to place is problematic. So, and because of the natural state of it, it's degrading to a certain extent. With some of the GMO crops as well in areas that are dealing with food crisis, with which we know that certain areas of Nigeria are about to experience true starvation. And it has been a conversation that we have had. Perhaps not the whole country is really aware of it because we are existing in our own silos. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that.
Well, so the first point about the conversations, are we having those conversations at the right level, at the right places, at the right levels? That's the first part. So the second part about GMO foods, I think that's a viable option that we should consider, right? The entire Sahel region of Nigeria, the entire Sahel region, I should say, of Africa, which encompasses a significant amount of Nigeria's territorial space, right, has already been listed by the Food and Agricultural Organization as food stressed, drought prone, and particularly susceptible to climate change. And so we need to look at these things. We need to look at, and this is some of the things that the experts were talking about in the conference, which is the basis of this story. We need to look at how to more appropriately integrate technology into our food management processes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ikemesit. Now, talking about a country that is big as Nigeria, we are ranking, or we've been ranked as third. Now, Nigeria is the third, according to this group, is the third most preferred destination for member countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, seeking to fund projects that would promote green economy in Africa, just third to Ethiopia and Kenya. For information purposes, OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has 36 member countries. That was founded in 1961, and it's aimed to stimulate economic progress and world trade. Gbolahan, what are your thoughts on this report?
Well, I think we should be glad this time around a little bit. At least we're making headlines for something positive in Nigeria not for the first time, but at least in the world as well. We're making. So in this article, he actually talks about the research was actually done by a UK agency or so. So we can give it some sort of a lot of credibility to
that's
it.
The Economic and Social Research Council.
Yep.
And Global Challenges Research Fund, really, they're funding this project.
Yep. So it talks about the level of funding that the country has received, and we're talking about Nigeria out of most of the African countries, we're the third largest recipient of funds from a lot of the developed countries, because the developed countries are the financiers. We're looking at Japan, we're looking at the we also have the United Kingdom, we're also looking at Canada as well. So these are all countries that are funding such projects or so
But
in
actually,
Nigeria.
the big reason why they focused on us is because we have no dedicated national green growth plan, and that's actually problematic. So,
Absolutely.
and because we are the most populous black nation, it's almost essential that for future generations and for any kind of green plans, that Nigeria is included in this.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to get to that. So it was talking about we not having any developmental plan on green projects in Nigeria. And when we're talking about green projects, of course, we're talking about solar panels, we're talking about windmills,
Renewable
alternative
energy,
sources of energy, renewable sources of energy. And so, of course, what has actually happened is that we've just been, I would say, lucky if we do not have any plans put in place that we turned out to be the largest nation in the world, or sorry, in Africa as well too. And so maybe there's a lot of eye on Nigeria, and as such we're getting a lot of funding also. But yes,
I agree, and this is part of the challenge. We just
Absolutely.
feel we're big enough. We can just piggyback off of that and not put in the level of structural depth, thought, thinking, and structure on the ground to ensure that we continue to receive investments
because
of this
when
kind.
you compare to Kenya and Ethiopia, you will find out that Kenya and Ethiopia really do have a lot of plans for development on green alternative sources of energy and water view as well. So we need to do more anyway in terms of having structures in place for this.
Thank you. We haven't done anything. So we'll round up with messages that have come in up on WhatsApp from Mr. No Shaking. He starts off the conversations by saying, I think in some ways the states are structured such that they can generate and utilize funds without recourse to the central. My opinion is that you should have the states stand up to their responsibility. The positive effect will then trickle down to all the nooks and crannies within the states. We just keep making unnecessary noise about restructuring. Timothy from Oluwale says, our vice president is a patriotic citizen who means well, but is simply being misunderstood. What he means by restructuring, not from a geographical perspective, is correct. He says we copied the American political constitution, but omitted what doesn't favor the North, which is wrong. His point regarding state police is also relevant, which I endorse, because this is basically a security issue consideration, he says. And let's see, up on our live stream, quite a few messages have come through. 007 at Dozier says, of what value is it of the court to stop the investigation of Ganju Dollar? The EFCC was investigating Fayose while he was still a governor, so what is it about Ganju Dollar? It doesn't stop the EFCC, it just stops the State House Assembly. And J. Lou says, government officials come out and give us statistics that 40 million of us are dealing with mental health disorders, and then they go back to their office. No action, no plan, no next step, no solution. That in itself is problematic. While Tony Anok, still talking about mental disorder statistics, says, not surprising. Have you guys seen Kule Afolaya at the airport? Trust me, you'll agree with the statistics. And we are going to talk about him up next at 8:15 when it's time for entertainment inside the Grapevine. We want to thank our analysts for coming in. Please find them on social media. Mr. G Quest is Gbolahan. You can find Ikemesit up as Judge Ike, and you can find Fred Allison at Mr. FD Allison. Thank you, gentlemen.
One pay, back.